What's really good, everybody? This is Nathan Alabach, and welcome to the podcast where we get into people's stories and go down a bunch of rabbit holes about what's really good in the world. Yes, for today's episode, I had on Drew Fairweather, aka Drew Toothpaste. Drew's been a real staple to internet culture, at least in my opinion, for a long time. He's the author of Toothpaste for Dinner, Married to the Sea. He also runs the website The Worst Things for Sale, which is pretty self-explanatory. He also hosts the podcast Fuck the Future, which is great. He used to do these funny videos on YouTube too called Drew Reviews, which I'm not sure if he does them anymore, but he's also produced a few different music projects over the years under names like Compressor and Crud Bump. The guy's he's done a lot. He's got a lot of projects under his belt, and we barely talked about any of them here. I had a rough idea of topics we could hit going into this, but we wound up just mostly going down a bunch of rabbit holes into just some history of internet culture and memes and weird Twitter, just a lot of the stuff that we cover on the show. I mean, just the stuff that I like. We also jumped on the topics of free speech and moderation on social media, just regarding how the barrier to entry online is completely gone. So now we're just dealing with some of the worst possible people all around the world organizing and all these other really just unprecedented problems, which are always fun to just banter about. Let's see, what else? We got into the cultural crisis of brands integrating into internet culture and the sort of dystopian advertising that we're seeing more and more of, which is obviously something I wrestle back and forth with a lot just from running the Steakum account. And Drew was a breath of fresh air with all of this. I mean, we definitely circle jerked a bit throughout the conversation since we kind of see things similarly, but it was just great talking to somebody who works as a creator online in this space and also understands the weird ethical gray areas that a lot of people, myself included, are dealing with, at least on some level. So yeah, I had a great time in this conversation, and I hope you all take something from it as well. I've got links to Drew's work in the show notes, as well as his Patreon, so please be encouraged to support his work, and as always, rate the podcast on iTunes, hit me up with feedback on social media, and all that good stuff, or whatever. So yeah, now let's get into what's really good. Drew, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, hey, it's great to talk to you. Thank you for inviting me on.
Of course, man. It's my pleasure. When I was going through just who you are and what you do, I was just overwhelmed with all of the mediums and stuff to even give people context to who you are, because you're all over the place. So, I mean, I guess before we jump into anything specific, I'll open up the floor to you and ask, what initially made you decide to get into the creative field as a whole, as a job?
That's a really good question. So like we were talking about, I got online in the late 80s, actually, probably 1989. I got online. It was before the web. You would FTP around or Gopher around. You would go on free nets. And I just had a great time. I was basically a kid then.
Right.
I was not an adult in 1989. I got online and I screwed around. And it was always basically... I would get online and it was fun, and sort of the idea was there weren't that many people online, but the people that were, you could reach them from a distance. And I remember being really impressed with myself at talking to somebody from Sweden or Norway. And I remember thinking that's a totally different country. It's on a different continent. It's all the way up there, over there, whatever.
Yeah.
And just the idea of communicating with people and having this ability to make people laugh, especially from a distance, was really what got me interested in it. Just the idea that, when it first started going online and posting things online, and not even necessarily on like a message board, a forum, something like that, but just, creating a website and putting things online was almost like putting graffiti somewhere, and somebody might walk by your graffiti, but you'd never know who they were, and most people wouldn't see it or wouldn't notice it, right? Mm-hmm. And so I got into it that way. I thought going online, posting and creating sites and everything was really funny. I started creating my own. I started posting illustrations and little short stories or essays or whatever in probably 1996, 1997. And it just kind of went from there.
So around that time, like, what were the main hubs that you spent your time on as far as like diving into chat rooms, forums? Like, was it primarily based around one like group of people, or were you kind of like in a bunch of different communities?
Well, I don't think it was really centralized. Mm-hmm. It was very atomized. Everybody was kind of all over the place. And I think people were looking for some place where, everybody was, where you could post something and, everybody could see it. Mm-hmm. I think was something everybody was looking for. Now, whether or not, flash forward to 2019, whether or not that ended well,
failed experiment.
Let's not go there yet. But up until social media started, I would say MySpace was really the point where everybody kind of transitioned to being online, mm-hmm. where it was everybody, people would use the internet for services. Before that, people might go on the internet to look things up, or they would get on and do some business or buy something or whatever. But basically, until MySpace, each individual person who did not have this predilection or this interest in posting their own creative content, mm-hmm. MySpace was really what pushed these people online. That also coincided with, I had a couple comics. I had a comic called Toothpaste for Dinner and a comic called Married to the Sea. Mm-hmm. And we really took advantage of the MySpace thing. We gave people codes and said, hey, you can post this directly on your MySpace. And, just a cut and paste or a drag and drop little bit of content was not easy to do yet with a computer. And, of course, nobody had phones in 2006, 2007. Right. They had phones, but it wasn't
not
like an
smartphones.
iPhone. Yeah. And you can't see a meme, save a meme to your camera roll, and then really easily repost it. So it wasn't quite there yet. So, but that was really the genesis of social media. And in retrospect, MySpace was pretty great because it had something about it that I really like and I really appreciate, which is this sort of rawness. You would just put HTML code, and if you wanted to change the whole color of your page, and you wanted to make it play a song, and you wanted to have falling snow over it, and you wanted to have animated skulls or whatever, you could do it very easily. And so that kind of went away in the next couple of years. When Twitter and Facebook came around, everything got sanitized, right?
Yeah, it was so much more personal at that point. And I feel especially around Zanga and MySpace, at least in my memory, I'm a little bit, I got involved, I think, around 2004, 2005. And it in my memory, at least, it's interesting thinking back how those platforms, even though for the most part, I think if you look at the general masses, how most people that had a MySpace then kind of migrated then to Facebook and to Instagram and all that, but it was still there was something about those early platforms where it was an intersection between your it could have just been a normal Joe Schmo who's going to high school and just wanted to make a profile to interact with their friends, but it could also be a programmer and a more tech-oriented person who really wanted to make this a deeper, personalized thing with HTML and getting really involved in making it their own brand almost. There's that kind of weird crossover, like you said, that just kind of went completely away with Facebook. I remember in the beginning of Facebook, there were still some Some of those like components to it, at least, like they tried to incorporate some apps and some third-party software in the beginning, but it seems like over time now all the platforms are just this really blank slate type of thing where everyone has the exact same colors and layout, and there's no way to change anything.
Oh yeah, for sure. And there's a measure of, keeping everything under control for the fact that now, of course, Tom from MySpace sold MySpace. I think he sold it to Fox, or he sold it to Fox's controlling corporation or whatever. I think the figure was around $500 million.
Yeah.
He sold that. And then that's when everybody started salivating and saying, oh, shit, we got to make sure this is like all cool for the investors, of course. And of course, again, flash forward to 2019, some content moderation would be nice. Like, it would be great if we didn't literally have like Nazis 2.0. It would be great if we didn't have the electronic KKK all over our site that we have to use, right?
Right. Yeah, moderation has always been one of the biggest issues, I guess, for all these platforms from the beginning. Because it's weird thinking back, and I wanted to get into this with you at some point. We can just jump into it here, because obviously as someone who was involved in those early stages, like, that in like I'm trying to think how do I put this? Like, in those early stages of the internet, it was a lot more homogenous in the sense where the barrier to entry was still pretty high. So I mean, there was a lot of just tech-oriented, affluent white guys who were programmers and coders and gamers who were essentially like establishing the infrastructure to a lot of these sites and a lot of the culture. And it's interesting how like that's kind of in a way how this whole thing launched, and now we're getting the like weird aftermath, the weird effects lingering of those early stages where there really was no moderation and there really was no like set rules or control over what was happening. We've always been kind of like one step behind the culture in a way, and now it just feels like it's rolled completely off a cliff. We don't know what to do about it.
Oh, yeah. And I think you identified something really important, which was that the idea of, middle class or affluent white technology bros. And this is like a corner of the world that is very famously lacking in empathy. And, it's easy to say, it's because of this certain mental thing, or it's because, people that get into this stuff have this certain personality disposition or whatever. Mm-hmm. But it's really... The internet is still as established as it is, as old as it is, in the fact that everybody's now been on smartphones for 3 or 5 years, if you include all the boomers and everybody else. It really still has this weird lack of humanization and empathy, which is crazy, because one of the old business adages is, you can't work around people. Businesses are made of people. You have to work with people, and the internet's the same way. You can't just internet and do it in the absence of people, because everything there is based on the existence of other people. No matter how much tech you've got, no matter how much investments people have made into technology and platforms and this and that, it's all other people, and there's sort of this very privileged idea that has existed for 20 or 30 years online, which is that the idea of quote unquote free speech is kind of like the trump card, right?
Yeah.
Just the idea that yes, we could moderate this. Yes, we could keep this hate speech, this, misogyny, racism, sexism, bigotry of all kinds. We could keep this off our platform, but it's a lot easier if we just say that it's a free speech zone and anybody can say anything, neglecting the whole idea of, hate speech being really, persistent and kind of like wriggling its way into other spaces and X, Y, and Z.
Right. Yeah, and how that all also ties in just to the fact we're now today in 2019, hate speech and just this whole new era of provocateurs. It's essentially this trajectory from early internet culture to now has led to the point where the blueprint is already set in stone, and now people who want to abuse and manipulate the system have a very easy pathway to do it. So it's like it's no longer as this black and white question of just should this all be principled on free speech? Because I mean, I've talked to people. I did a podcast recently with Eric Martin, who was one of the general manager of Reddit. Yeah, so he was going off at one point when we were talking about some of the history of Reddit as a platform, about how in like the mid 2000s ish, when it was starting to kind of emerge, how there was so much emphasis just culturally over the fact that it was like the economic collapse was on the rise, and there was a lot of distrust in media and traditional institutions. And when people looked to online culture, it was kind of this like middle finger almost to traditional institutions. It was like, oh, we get to control the information here. We get to do and say whatever we want. So at least in those early phases, there was at least more, I think, ground to kind of base this loosely held concept of free speech over, like, we have this open access platform. We can kind of do what we want with it. But now, like, flash forward to today, that principle has just been stretched and politicized and just like really degraded to the point where so many people, I mean, including the current president, like there's so many ways to manipulate that whole concept. And basically you get to say whatever you want and do the most outrageous, hateful thing, knowing that people are going to react to it. And then when you get those reactions, it just keeps perpetuating the cycle that then just keeps feeding into itself. And there's no way off that ride. It's just going to keep doing it without moderation. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think that's important to point out. And, the moderation and, the policing of the site has basically fallen back on us, where the corporations that are running these sites and the people that are working for the corporations running these sites, there's a volume of essentially speech that's happening. People are talking all the time, like millions of people talking every second of every day around the clock. And it's impossible to do this at scale and run a company profitably. So you have to have basically an unmoderated site and then expect people to go in and report things that are, basically things that break the terms of service, right. Not things that are offensive because, if somebody says something offensive or if somebody, it is very insulting to you or whatever, that never breaks anybody's terms of service, which, is fine. I personally, as somebody who was on the internet a very long time ago, and of course as a white man, like a hetero cis white man, yeah. Like I'm very privileged that like I'm like, oh, I can just shake it off. But I know that there are things that people say to degrade minorities, whether they're sexual minorities or racial minorities or what have you. There are things that degrade people who are in certain minorities that, don't really apply to me.
Right.
So it's very easy for me, like an old, bald, white dude, like, yeah, just shrug it off. But I know, I understand how shitty it is. And I understand what a burden it is to ask people, basically it's to the point where, there's a comic artist that I follow online, and she posted and said, reply guys, which, I have people that reply to me on Twitter or leave comments on Facebook or Instagram or whatever. But let's be honest, it's mostly Twitter.
Yeah.
And it's like fine, but women have like a totally different experience,
right?
Obviously. And it's really hard to establish a benchmark for moderating this, for example. So women have reply guys, which is dudes will just, women will post, and dudes, like a subset of dudes, like a small number of dudes will just reply to everything. And I saw somebody's this comic artist I follow, she's an illustrator and she posts on Twitter and stuff. And she said, everybody that joins Twitter will be assigned a screen name and their own reply guy. And it's really hard. And then, if you have somebody that's basically following you around and harassing you, essentially, but they're not breaking the terms of service, there's nothing that the service will do. There's nothing that Twitter will do.
Right.
And it's clearly, somebody is following you around and bothering you, and it's like this unwanted attention, but it's subjective, right? Because somebody who's working for the site, they work in this big warehouse building. They're like they work for Twitter or Facebook or whatever, and they're moderating. And they say, well, this is somebody he didn't say he was going to kill you, and he didn't. What are the terms of service? He didn't say for you to kill yourself, and he didn't make any violent threats.
Right.
So there's nothing we're going to do. So basically, it's this de facto set of rules, which basically says, basically if somebody doesn't say they're going to kill you, then people can do anything. And now there was always the idea that existed online. I'm sure you've seen Tyler, the Creator, who's this rapper, originally from the group Odd Future, and he had a TV show and stuff. Mm-hmm. He said cyberbullying, I don't remember the exact quote. Also, I think he used the N-word, which obviously I'm not going to repeat.
Yeah, he was basically just like, it's not real, right? Or that it's just like stupid. He said it's not real. If you're getting cyberbullied, turn off the computer. But the thing is, in 2019, everybody has to use their phone all the time. That's just how the world is. You can't escape it.
Right, exactly. And I think it's built on the idea that, the whole thing is established, just like you said, from these old school tech bros who have all this technical knowledge. They know engineering and computer science and coding and all this stuff. And their point of view is, if you're being cyberbullied, just get off the computer.
Right.
But that's no longer possible. So
yeah, like now we're seeing way more people have to literally delete their accounts, or what do you call it, temporarily deactivate their accounts just to get back in like a mentally healthy state of mind, because it's just you once you're. It's like if your notifications are blowing up on your phone, you can't just, even if you ignore it, what are you going to do? I mean, it's still happening. Like, you're still getting all that hate. Like, it's all still in the ether somewhere. So, I mean, you can't really turn it off. Even if you turn your phone off, even if you log off, it's still all occurring. It's still having an effect on you. And it does suck. That's like, it's interesting that the way you're putting it, because there is this weird tension between the idea that there should be more moderation. Clearly, there should be 100 times the amount of moderation. But on the same hand, it's like, it is subjective. Like, you bring up the reply guys thing, and I remember there was a meme being spread around someone made about reply guys, which was really funny. And it had 3 columns of types of ones, and ones. There was one column where it was just reply guys that basically mean well but just say dumb stuff, and there was ones that just basically try to take the focus of the conversation somewhere else and kind of act like they're above it all. Then there's the column of people who are just actually out to get you, and they're being vicious and they're harassing you. And to your point, it's that is such a obnoxiously subjective thing to enforce in a set of rules, because if you're a moderator and you're looking at these situations, it's in some of those cases you would have to go like if it's the creator friend that you were talking about, and they have one or two guys who are going to every single tweet, you'd have to like go through and find like all the different tweets, like line them up, make sure they're all reported, and be like, oh, I can now file 10 times this person just like harassed them, and like what's the degree of harassment, and then it becomes this huge issue. So it's like, what, in your opinion, like how do you, like if you had the resources, or if you had the ability to kind of curb some of these changes, like how would you implement a structure of rules or a change to kind of curb some of these really weird, ambiguous situations that we find ourselves in?
That is a really huge question, and that's like a $1 billion question.
It's the one that no one has the answer for.
Right. No, and I think it's great to ask the question and say, well, what would you do? And it's very hard. It's like it's almost like a koan. It's like a Zen question. Like you can meditate on it, but it doesn't have
right. You can be
answer.
Jack, and you can go off and do a meditation retreat for 6 months or whatever. But you're gonna come back and have no answers and have any idea what to do still.
Yeah, and all. Yeah, and this is assuming that Jack is like a benevolent leader.
Oh, God, yeah.
This is. I'm assuming he won't listen to this, but this is a guy, and like I said, I was online during the entirety of the '90s. I remember this guy posting like weird poetry and posting like selfies of himself. Yeah.
He's got a god complex.
like old blogger stuff. And I was like, whatever. And then he ended up being like the Twitter guy. And so the worst part of it all really is not that, somebody made a site and you can say anything on the site, because that has always existed. Mm-hmm. Like since websites came about, there's always been sites where you can go to and anybody can say anything they want. It's that this is literally the website you have to use.
Right.
And to go off Twitter is essentially to no longer exist in many ways, which, of course, considering that it's a private corporation and, considering that, it's run by its own board, it's run by this guy who is like an avid Bitcoin user and a follower of all these conservative people. And God, yeah. I wish I had a list of everything that the guy's into. I mean, look, long story short, we have always, as humanity, suffered by being under the control of dipshits. Look, whether it's the Rockefellers and Carnegies, they step out every now and again and make a museum or a library, whatever. Everybody at the top has always been a complete dipshit. Mm-hmm. And this is no different. A guy has some theoretical amount of money and some enormous amount of power, and you have to be really super out of the ordinary to not be a dipshit.
Right.
I think it's just a matter of human nature, and we're unfortunately in this position, Nathan, you and I, as people who have brands, as people who essentially work for brands. So I sell T-shirts, I sell mugs, I sell memberships to a Patreon where like you can sign up and every month I'll send you a different T-shirt, like an exclusive T-shirt. We both do this stuff, and I sell music and I sell other stuff online, but we have to use these platforms because this is where everybody is. And unfortunately, we have to go where everybody is. And of course, there's this idea lingering that, we could have this alternate place online where everybody could go to all the time, and it would be like state owned. And that would be like Russia has something called VK, mm-hmm. and China has something called Weibo or Weibo. It's like their state's social media, and it's like super ultra censored. You can't say anything.
Right.
Yeah, you can't say anything bad. So if we had something like that, it would be like a Twitter where you couldn't shit talk Donald Trump.
Right, exactly. Like the most appealing part of Twitter for so many people, which is that you could just shout into the void at politicians, would just be immediately revoked if it was nationalized.
Yeah. So, but this leads me to something, and I wanted to ask you about this, and this is a great place because you're being recorded.
Oh, great.
So one of the things I've noticed is that folks who are essentially working in marketing for brands, or they're running social media marketing for brands, or they're, whether they're working on behalf of the brand or they're working as a consultant or whatever, they have to interact with this primordial internet culture ooze. Mm-hmm. And I know we talked about this some, the fact that, there are these entities that existed on the internet, whether it's something awful or it's or it's MySpace, or it's LiveJournal, or Sega, or Tripod, AngelFire, GeoCities, all these old entities. And there are all these old memes going back 5, 10, 15 years. The Rick Roll, the Rick Astley thing started on 4chan. And just a super common example, brands picked that up and brands are talking about it.
Right.
And so I was interested in kind of exploring the idea that, hey, everybody has to be online, which means that companies have to be online. And I accept this as totally normal.
Unfortunately, it's normal.
Well, okay. So if I go online and I am an artist online and I'm selling my stuff online, I can't reasonably expect that people are not, for example, going to sell cheesesteaks online, right? So, I mean, it is what it is. I have always felt like I have the right to determine what my experience online is going to be. And if I don't want to see ads, I won't sign up to see ads.
Right.
But a lot of people love to see ads. And so here's something I was going to throw out, and I'm interested in your thoughts on this. So there's a game company called THQ. Have you heard of them?
THQ, I think so, yeah.
It's like THQ Nordic, I think might be the full name of the company, or maybe that's a part of it. I don't know. But anyway, so they did a Q&A on a website called 8chan. And I think this happened about a month ago. They did a Q&A. And this 8chan website is basically the worst of the worst.
Yeah, it's like where the people on 4chan go because they're getting too moderated.
Yes, exactly. That's a really nice way of putting it. That, yeah, the worst of the worst people go to this 8chan website because they can't hack it on 4chan because their posts keep getting deleted for breaking the terms of service. Yep. Long story short. And this game website or this game company did this Q&A on this website and was interacting with these people's fans. Mm-hmm. And so there's something that I find weirdly dissonant about the fact that, yeah, brands have to be online. People who work for these brands have to be online, but they're interacting with this very primordial internet culture, and they're interacting with the idea that, it's all free speech. Mm-hmm. And so companies are tying their brands to these outlets which have like outright posted things that I think everybody would find objectionable.
Right.
Without going into the details, really super offensive, like on a human level.
Yeah, if anyone just took 5 minutes to scroll through 8chan's boards, you would just see the most horrific stuff you could write online.
Yeah, and it's actually, I would even say it's to the point where unless you're like an archaeologist or unless you are like not going to be offended at anything, I wouldn't go and look at it, because it's just like it's the kind of thing that just makes my head hurt. You know, just the idea that people will really go online and be so hateful. But all these brands, and this has been going on for quite a long time, that people have been stepping out, all these brands have been stepping out, and they've been trying to capitalize and trying to make reference to memes, right?
Right.
Even if you go back and you look at like the old Reddit memes, like the troll face or whatever, you know, that originated on Reddit, which pretty famously refused to take down like celebrity nude photographs that were hacked. Like, nobody had the right to have these. They were hacked. They were posted on Reddit, and Reddit refused to take them down under the idea of free speech.
Yeah.
Just like Reddit had an entire board dedicated to sexy pictures of children, which is a phrase which really curdles my heart. I hate to even think about it. And Reddit had a board called Creep Shots, which was people who were members of this board would go around and they would take pictures of women like bending over or something, just in public, just regular people who did not consent to it.
Yeah, and like so. So go ahead.
No, I'm just saying, like, that is something where all this stuff that originated on Reddit, brands will very openly make reference to it, and I'm not sure that they maybe understand what they're saying.
Right. And it's so weird to think too how like you referenced a few of those just awful subs, and I remember, I forget if I talked to Eric Martin about this specifically, but just in kind of prepping and then thinking about what I wanted to talk to him about prior, it's just crazy how in the formative years of Reddit between like 2006 and 9-ish, when it was just kind of picking up steam, so many of the most popular subs on the site were these like horrible subreddits, and it was where like all the crazy just edgelord type people of the internet went to gather. And like there was that one user, Violent Acres, who was like the mod of like, I don't even know, it was like hundreds of those just terrible types of subs. And there was that whole, you know, expose on him with CNN and Gawker and that whole deal. And it's crazy thinking back because like that guy, that really just trashy, awful person who just had all these subs that he was moderating, when it basically surfaced that this whole thing was a problem, and then the media got involved, of course, then Reddit completely tried to disassociate itself from that user, because they want, like, them, along with all the other social media platforms, want to be more like ad friendly and brand friendly. Like they want the platform to be able to coexist in the media space and have people and have like their user base be having a good experience, whatever you want to call it. So like, of course, like right when it reaches its peak of, you know, notoriety, then of course they're like, oh, we gotta stop this thing. But it is this weird situation because you kind of like you see those same ripples all across the board. Like I remember a few years ago, I think it was like before, it might have been 2013, 2014. Oh, no. Actually, it was 2016 or 17 this happened, because it was after the sort of Pepe the Frog meme had already been a cycle of the election, like the election cycle. And I remember Wendy's, one person on their team had tweeted out a Pepe meme. And I guess, I don't remember what their excuse was. I think they might have said that it was like in a folder of other like fan-made content, and they just, the person who posted it didn't know, or whatever it might have been. But just the fact that like that happened at the time it happened, which was like right in the heat of that meme becoming like the sort of symbol for Trump and the hate speech. And there was just that kind of whole like wave. It's kind of died down now, I think, to a degree, but that period especially was like, it was being plastered all over the place. So like you see these brands at different times in different places on different platforms kind of like riding this wave, trying to be edgy, trying to be cool, because just like you said, I mean, you grew up on internet culture. I feel like a lot of the people between my age and your age who grew up in these different generations of the culture, they eventually grow up to be in the jobs that are actually affecting them. So like the people our age are either growing up to work at Twitter, or they're growing up to work at Wendy's, and like Wendy's corporate office. And it's just interesting because like now we're at this point the past few years where so many of the companies that are in the limelight for whether it's a scandal or whether it's like a quote unquote great viral meme, it's all because so many of the people working at these companies grew up in the culture. Because like up to a few years ago, you had this whole trend of like the fellow kids era where brands were saying "bae," and you had like you had like that wave of weird Twitter, like weird Twitter's emergence between like 2012 and 14, where so many of like the most prominent users in that kind of like amorphous group became more notorious because they'd troll these brands because the brands didn't really know the culture. They didn't really know anything about what was going on. It was very clear that they were just kind of latching on to these stupid trends. So then weird Twitter and all those types of characters and users that had kind of stemmed from something awful and all those other earlier web forums, they essentially made a name and carved out a space for themselves to criticize these brands, which was really, I think, ultimately beneficial because like no one else really was up until that point. And then it's just been interesting because since that period, it feels like there's just been this really hard turn for brands to become way more savvy, because now it is all these older people that are, they understand the culture to a certain degree. So now we're in this like really, really weird era, and I think it's only going to get worse. I mean, I talk about it and I write about it a lot because as all of these generations continue getting older, it's going to continue being more people who are on the in of these jokes and these references and these communities. So all that is going to kind of continue to integrate between our advertising and our culture. And I don't know. I mean, it's mostly a bad thing, I think, but it's also, to your point, like you said, just coexisting on any platform where you're selling anything, you're just using it for free in general. Like, Twitter's free, Facebook's free, Reddit's free. Like, most of these platforms are free to the degree that, they host advertising. Like, they host, a platform for people to sell shit on so, like, they can make their money. And that in and of itself is not really good or bad. I think it's just the way the market works at this point, I guess you'd say. But ultimately, I think it's only going to get way worse because now all these people that did grow up on 4chan or something awful or Tumblr or YouTube, they're in the seats of control at these companies, whether it is YouTube itself or like a Wendy's. Now that integration is coming full circle because the future generations, like the kids who are growing up now and don't really have the context for a lot of what we're talking about because they grew up and as soon as they could have a phone, they were already like on Instagram, Snapchat, like all these newer apps. Like they're a lot more disenfranchised with ads because they're growing up in a world that they can skip ads if they want. They can pay for premium services. They're not watching cable television. So there's this whole like weird shift happening where because the people like you and I are in these positions of power and we're advertising to these now younger generations coming up, we have to almost up the ante in order to even make anything work to get through to these younger generations because they are way more critical and cynical and just way more savvy when it comes to understanding the technology, so that it just perpetuates this whole pattern of brands trying really hard and stumbling along the way, making Pepe references and and whatever the hell else. You know what I mean?
yeah, totally. And I think that for as much as folks who are in their 20s and 30s are cynical about ads, and everybody's been advertised to their whole life. Look, I was born in the very late 70s. I grew up watching television, and television had ads, and you couldn't skip the ads. Mm-hmm. And radio had ads, you couldn't skip the ads because that was what was on the radio. It is right. It is what it is. I found in the stuff that I've read, it's very funny that a lot of kids now, and I would say when I say kids, I mean like anybody under like 25. But
I just read that 30 is like the new whatever 20 or something. They're saying that you're still a kid till you're 30 basically. So
yeah, exactly. I think until you're 26, because that's when your Cobra insurance runs out, right?
Right.
So
then you're just
26 and under, you're part of the kids. Look, something I've seen is that kids, and this is particularly teens and maybe even younger kids, when they pop off on Instagram, one of the things they do is they will show off brands that they're using and type hashtag brand and type, whatever the brand is, Starbucks or Nike or whatever, hashtag Starbucks, and they'll show off the products. And there's almost this idea that's coming around that kind of contradicts, I think, the kind of feeling you and I both have about the brands, which is, we're tired of hearing about brands. We're tired of seeing brands. But I think to a certain demographic of people, whether it's an age or class or just someone who is segmented in being like less ironic and less savvy than we are. Right. They really like the idea of being sponsored by a brand or having the approval of a brand. And so people will post fake sponsored posts on Instagram pretending that they're being sponsored by Supreme or, Adidas or Pepsi or whatever. They'll pretend, and this kind of self-perpetuates because people see that, and then if they're like, oh, this person is being sponsored by, skinny track pants, then they'll be like, shit, I need to know because this person is famous enough or they're popular enough to get sponsored. So it's like this whole snowball thing that happens. And so people are faking being sponsored so they can get more attention. And so there's this whole segment of the audience that's going totally the other way. And I think this plays into the idea that, for as much as people in our demo who are like, yeah, I've been on the internet a long time, right?
Everyone on Twitter,
I think, I think for as much as people are like that, there are a ton of people who legitimately want to see what brands are doing. They legitimately want to know what they should buy. And it comes back to this idea that I've always thought was ridiculous. Even 10, 20 years ago, I thought it was ridiculous. People would say, well, I am watching the Super Bowl, but I'm only watching the Super Bowl for the commercials. Everybody's heard this. You've heard this, right?
Of course, yeah.
You've heard people say this, whether it's your friends or family members or people at work or whatever. And I think that idea perpetuates itself through culture. I think there are people really who are just online and they are not making anything creative. They are just consumers and they want to know what the brands are doing. And I've come around to the idea that I'm too good I'm too good to follow brands because I'm like, why would I want to be advertised to? Right. Because I have
Dude, my wife makes fun of me so much because I refuse to pay for premium Spotify, so I get the ads. And when we're listening to stuff in the car, as soon as it gets to an ad, I just turn the volume all the way down. And she's like, "What are you doing?" I'm just like, "I can't do it. I don't want to listen to this."
No, totally. And for as much as we dislike ads, we will never dislike ads as much as people who like ads like them. And so I think there's always going to be this balance that really pushes back on us and really overwhelms what we want, which is when it comes down to it, we're really outliers that we don't want to be advertised to in the car. When I'm listening, and I have at some point I've bought records or tapes or CDs with music, and for me to go and listen to them on Spotify, I feel like I already own this. I should not have to hear advertising with this, right? Yeah. right? Like I think a lot of people have that feeling.
Yeah, I think you're touching on something. Oh, no, go ahead. Sorry, I don't want to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, you're touching on something interesting here because I feel like you're kind of exploiting the hole in both you and I's biases because we do spend so much time in these extremely online circles. And for what it's worth, I think Twitter, obviously not all of Twitter, I mean, it's a huge platform, but what kind of constitutes for lack of a better word, the culture of Twitter, which is the amorphous blob of weird Twitter, which kind of overlaps with funny Twitter and left Twitter, and there's all these like sub communities that are all, we follow a lot of the same accounts, and the humor injects itself across the site. And I think that platform as a whole, it really has been like a mainstream hub, but for counterculture people, because it's the kind of outlier compared to like Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat, where the people that are on Twitter mostly did come from those like older web communities, wherever they might have been. And because it is such like a 24/7 hell machine, we're like much more tied into the political cycle and news that's breaking and who we're mad at today. And it just becomes this whole thing that we tether ourselves to, versus what you're talking about, which is more this like influencer culture that's been emerging among the younger generations, because now you got these younger kids who are growing up, and when they're 8-10 years old, they tell their parents they want to be an influencer, like they want to be a Twitch streamer, a YouTube star, they want to be the next Kylie Jenner or whatever. And like you're right, because that is in the sort of socioeconomic consumer-based system that we live in, that's just what's going to happen. Like it's a materialistic world, and like we grow up now, again, like you said, kind of depending on your geography, your class, all that. But just generally speaking, when you look into the scope of pop culture, we're growing up with all these things, and you have all these devices and new technologies coming out as a really young kid. You see all this, you're immersed in it, and then you grow up thinking, oh, the way to get into this field is to basically sell out. And that's like becoming the new norm, essentially. Because like before, like even when I was growing up, and I'm younger than you are, but when I was growing up, there was still this emphasis like it's like go to college and just go to like business school or marketing school, wherever it might have been, and eventually land like a really normal, cushiony job where you just sit somewhere at a 9 to 5. That's not really the aspiration anymore for the general population of kids growing up. Like now they want to be a star. Like all the focus of social media, which is just kind of personalized our ego identities. Like now we all have this very distinct feeling about who we are at a really young age, and then the way to get that, the way to exploit that, and the way to make that into a profitable brand or whatever you want to call it is through brands, and it's through sponsorships and advertising. So I think you're right. Like that's like the mainstream culture and the kind of space that you and I exist in is more of this counterculture, if you want to just call it that for lack of better descriptors. And that even makes it more interesting because a lot of the space that you or I experience these brands in, which is on Twitter, it's like because that is like a highly centralized hub for counterculture, in a lot of ways it feels like there's something being like ripped out of the community when brands come in and try to act like they're part of the culture itself. Like the people in the culture then of course react like you're stealing who we are, like you're stealing our identity, you're stealing the essence of what makes this place or this group special. So like that, it is interesting because like you definitely don't see that same attitude on people that use Instagram for influencers or even like YouTube. Like there's not really that same attitude there. It's a completely at odds set of ideologies. And it's interesting that you brought that up.
Yeah, and I think it's really funny that just like you said, if you're on Instagram, you expect to scroll past ads and you just scroll past them and it is what it is. Nobody will. I mean, on Instagram, and maybe I don't have as full of an experience because I don't use it as much as I use Twitter, but I don't find that people will try to call out advertisers or companies, take a screenshot of this
Never
and
happens.
be like, oh, does it actually happen? I mean, I don't.
No, it doesn't. You're right. It never happens.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I don't spend a lot of time on there. I am on Twitter all day. But, people don't take a screenshot of it and be like, lol, look at this. This is terrible. This is stupid, whatever. And I think there's this sort of antagonistic feeling towards anybody who uses social media, and I would say specifically Twitter, because a lot of people, a lot of our mutual friends or a lot of people we're mutually acquainted with have this idea that they get on Twitter because it's funny and creative and all this. And of course, it ended up being a Nazi website for like the dumbest, like most out of shape, like demented, evil guy, took it and used it to become president, and the Nazi who runs the site doesn't care and he likes it. And so it's not what people think it is, but they're still insisting that, Twitter is this absolutely like meritocratic place.
Yeah, it's the holy
right?
land.
where if you're funny, that's what counts. And, you must, the 10 Commandments, like, you must shit on brands or whatever. Look, I don't follow brands. I don't give a shit. I don't care. Brands and companies are going to come on Twitter and post. And then if people like it, they're going to repost it. And if people don't like it, they're not going to like it and they're not going to retweet it. Mm-hmm. It's totally fine. It doesn't offend me. Right. But there are people who really want to take this site, and it's really counterintuitive because, like we've talked about, look, this is essentially a site that is like a Nazi site that helped inculcate the new right wing that's tied to the neo-Nazis and, is created in such a way to facilitate, right-wing people harassing folks who don't like the president or Bernie people or whatever. It's all this terrible mess. And like I told you, I remember I had a conversation with you a while ago where I mentioned, occasionally something I post, and all the stuff I post is just stupid. Okay, I'll just post things I think of, or I'll make a little Photoshop and it's funny or whatever, and I'll post something and it'll go into this circle of like one of these hate groups. Right. And one of the things I posted ended up in a hate group. It was a picture of cops, and they were like beating up a deer. And they had the cop gloves on. You know what I mean? They had the black, like the cop rubber gloves on, and they were just whipping this deer's ass. And I posted the pic, and the cop was like choking out the deer. It was really unreasonable. Okay. Because number one, okay, here's the thing. Here's what I've told my kid is that, like, if a bug comes in the house, okay, or if a deer comes in the house, you can fuck it up because this is your house. You live here. This is inside, right? Right. And this is just, you establish boundaries and you create these cognitive frameworks that your kids can use to deal with the world. And I said, but if you're outside, you don't step on a bug, you don't mess with animals, whatever. Like you can feed animals, you can put out food or whatever. You can look at animals, but you don't mess with animals because outside is where the animals live. Mm-hmm. And like almost the whole world is outside, right? Yeah. So the animals get all the outside. Anyway, the cops were outside and they were choking the deer, which is unreasonable to me because that's where the deer lives. But I got these people who were right wing and they were cop suckers and everything and saying, this and that and calling me a cuck. Of course. And all this saying, well, you're stupid because I actually like it when a cop kicks a deer's ass. Jeez. And, like we said before, there's really no way to moderate it, but it's at a point where you really cannot you can't post things that are really actually entertaining anymore without having people take it and try to spin it in such a way that they get mad at it. Right. And I'm not saying I'm not doing like Ricky Gervais, like, Like, oh, you know, you know,
Terrible edgelord humor that just has no basis in actual humor.
yeah, no, I'm criticizing the people in power for abusing animals. I think that's pretty, like, objectively okay to do.
No,
To
not
say,
cool, bro. You're a cuck, bro.
yeah, like, I'm sorry that you wanted to kiss the cop, and I said the cop was bad. Like, whatever, it's fine. It's fine. It's fine. But I think that there are people also who are in our sphere of people who are posting funny stuff online, and in some cases see themselves as sort of this check and balance on, Republicans or Republican commentators. Of course, it doesn't do anything, which none of these folks understand. These are basically, people, whether they're leftist or liberal or whatever, they're posting and they're trying, they'll post and they'll be like, this guy's bald.
Yeah, and you're like good one.
This guy's short. He looks dumb. Like, and maybe I'm short and bald and I'm old and I make dad jokes. So maybe
right.
I'm like, I don't agree with the viewpoint of any of these Republican shitheads, right? But just constantly attacking people on these very small points that have nothing to do with what they're actually saying.
Right. And that's the main attack that so many of the people on Twitter use. Like, I remember reading I think it was a Nathan Robinson piece like a while ago, where I don't remember when he wrote it, but it was literally titled, I think, Bad Ways to Criticize Trump. And it literally went into all that, just detailing how counterproductive it is to go after just the physical appearance over and over again, because it's literally painting you as a hypocrite, because it's coming from the people who are constantly like, image doesn't matter, we should be good to each other no matter what we look like or whatever's going on. But like, that tends to be the low-hanging fruit on Twitter that people just jump on.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And not to give anybody any ammunition, but I know people have responded to me, and it's somebody who doesn't follow me or whatever, and they don't have their picture online. It's like an anime or something, right? It's like a little hentai guy. And, they don't ever post a picture of themselves, but they'll be like, bro, your beard looks like shit.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And you're just you're like, well, I mean, at least I have the courage to keep my profile like actually public in this situation. I mean, it's such a weird space to be in like that, because it's like I get that same stuff all the time, and like, I don't care. Like, to a certain degree, like we said with us, like, we're in heightened privileged positions where like there's certain elements of attack, whether it's like physical appearance or background, whatever. I don't really I don't let it get to me. Like, I think to a degree, some of it's just fun banter. Like, if you want to make fun of somebody for something about them in certain contexts, it's fine. Like, I make fun of friends of mine in certain contexts that they laugh at. But when it comes to just targeting a stranger on the internet based off their physical appearance when you're just an anonymous like egg on Twitter, it's just the dumbest, most short-sighted thing you could do. But that's just the hellscape that we're in. It is what it is.
Oh yeah, and these are the same people that will respond to brands. And it's like there's a company and they are using a free product, right? Essentially, Twitter is free, as they say. This is a free website, or this is a free app, and companies have to use this stuff, right? And they have to use Facebook. You don't have to follow them. You don't have to interact with them, but they have to use it, and they're made up of people. And I think it's really easy to drag out people and say, well, you should not be working at this job, where the reality is if you're listening to this, and maybe if you're listening to this, you work at like a charity or something, in which case you actually are better than me.
They have the moral high ground.
But I also think that people who are of the character and of the personality to work to actually help society, I think maybe generally they're not out like trying to take a big dump on somebody who's trying to sell sandwiches so they can make a salary. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, they're working at banks or an insurance company or something.
Right. So I quit my last corporate job. I worked at several corporations. I quit my last corporate job in 2003.
Congrats.
Well, it's been here and there. I had made $8,000 working there, and then I had made $8,000 in the prior year selling T-shirts online. I was like, well, I think I could quit this job, and I think I could just do the T-shirt thing for a while and then see how that goes. And it went okay. And, I lucked into the explosion of the internet. I lucked into taking advantage of MySpace. I lucked into actually like funny T-shirts being a fashion thing for a few years in the '00s, right? Mm-hmm. Like last decade. So a lot of it is due to luck. I'm not going to lie. I'm not super savvy, and I'm not a great business guy, right? But this whole idea that whatever somebody does, they're going to criticize me for selling mugs online or selling T-shirts, or they're going to criticize, like you said, the social media person for a restaurant or a product or whatever for posting online and trying to do what they have to do. I used to work for a chemical company. So I came up and I got a degree, in chemistry, and I learned all this stuff about chemistry, and I went to work for this place. And so I used to do analysis. I worked in the quality control lab, and I used to do analysis on this product that was labeled as an asphalt additive. And I didn't think twice about it. It was like this thick, viscous material. If I identified like chemically what it is, I think I might identify who I used to work for, which I don't want to do. But it was like this very viscous, thick thing. And it was like, yeah, of course that goes in asphalt. It's like dark and it's really thick, whatever. And so I was working on it, and I was talking to a guy who had been working in the lab for about 20 years. And I was talking to him, and he's like, you know what they use this for? And I was like, oh, yeah, asphalt. And he kind of grins. And I was like, what do they use it for? And this was like 2003, right? Mm-hmm. And the country had just gotten into a war in Afghanistan and Iraq. And he's like, they put this in bombs. And I said, well, what do you mean? What do you mean they put it in bombs? He said, here's what they do. This is something they put in bombs. And it's this very thick liquid, right? It's like tar. And they put it in bombs along with this other aggregate material, which means like rocks and stones and sort of this shitty, gritty material. And they needed something that was high viscosity, and this weighted down the actual explosive material.
Wow.
And it stuck together well enough that it would help contain the explosion, because the longer they could contain the pressure in the bomb, the more powerful the bomb would be at destroying things.
Wow.
So I was helping to ensure that a bomb was like killing extra people in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I was very conflicted, of course. And, the first day he told me, I was like, oh, wow. And then, over time, I kind of thought about it more, and I thought about it more. And obviously, I still think about it. It's kind of bizarre, but the idea that anybody, if you work in the banking sector, okay, like you said, hey, maybe you work at a bank. If you work in the banking sector, you're part of an industry that denies loans to minorities. Okay, this is a sector, an industry where up until very recently, women and minorities could not get loans, couldn't get credit cards, couldn't buy property. Okay, you're working for fucking evil people.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm not even going to go into like all the details. And, you know, Nathan, we've talked about some people that we mutually know that work for arguably extremely evil companies. And I'm not talking Google or Facebook. I'm talking about companies that actually really destroy people's lives and destroy their privacy and their security and everything else, you know, to make a long story short. But when you think about it, tweeting and saying, hey, buy a fucking burger. You know, posting on Facebook and saying, hey, our fries are extra salty this week. Posting on Instagram and saying, McRib is back. You know, it's really, when you think about it, it's really innocuous. You post and you say, buy some shoes. And you know what? You need to put shoes on your feet to walk. You need shoes. You can't go to 7-Eleven without shoes because it says no shoes, no shirt, no service. You need shoes. You need a shirt. You need a commercial to tell you what shirt to buy. When it comes down to it, I think people can get completely up their asses in these bubbles thinking that they're hot shit when really everybody is posting on the free website and the Nazi that's running the site is like panicking, trying to figure out how to make money from the website, which we've already done. We've already solved the problem. I sell T-shirts. You sell cheesesteaks. You know, the girl from Wendy's sells hamburgers. We're all like pretty decent at our job. And over the past 10 years, I've gotten pretty good at thinking of stuff that people like and then selling them stuff they like at a fair price. And then they buy the stuff and they have it and they wear that and it's fine. Like all of it is totally fine. I'm not building bombs anymore, right?
Right.
I could be building bombs. And there are folks out there that think, well, if you would just have a normal job building bombs, like that would be more ethical than selling stuff on Twitter because I personally want to experience Twitter without ads. So it's better if you bomb children in Afghanistan.
Right. It's so ridiculous. And obviously and we talked about this before as well. There's just a inevitable level of cognitive dissonance, and no matter what we do, because you know we're in this consumer-based system, and we not just that, but we're specifically you and I, like we're in a country that has imperialist tendencies, and there's all these really just shitty like aspects of our system just ingrained into what we do in pretty much every corner of society. And some people get lucky. I mean, if you're in a small town, obviously you can. I shouldn't even say lucky, but circumstantially, some people in small towns, they might be just working for local small businesses where it's just much more, you know, like kind of secluded from the corporate world. But for most people who live in or around the major cities trying to make a decent amount of money for themselves and their families, I mean, you are just trapped in corporate America. Like you're trapped in this cycle, and it sucks because obviously we're buying clothing and products that are made from slave labor, and we're eating animals that are being tortured and murdered for our taste buds, essentially. And like you could just keep going down the list. I mean, there's so many just these really gray lines like you're talking about here, and it does feel like specifically right now that we're at a point where advertising, because of the way it's integrated into social media, is just a very easy target. And I think to a degree, I mean, kind of going back to what I was saying, like I think as a general rule, it's a good thing among the many bad things that social media has kind of, and internet culture has presented. I mean, I think it's a good thing that people have a voice and they can be a little bit more informed about their buying patterns, and they can take a look at certain forms of advertising or certain companies. Like I remember the Twitter account Respectable Lawyer. He did a thread like 2 years ago, or I think it was in the beginning of 2000. No, maybe it was like a year ago. I guess it's like the beginning of 2018. He did this long thread that went viral about the practices that Wendy's uses for slave labor, where like they're among the the last, I think, at least at that point, I'm not sure anymore, but they were among like the last company among the major fast food retailers like Subway, McDonald's, Taco Bell, all them. They were like the last one to not sign on to some agreement, which was basically like helping to pay I think it was the Mexican laborers a fair wage or something like that. So then like something like that goes viral, and it's like that's a good thing. Like now more people, if they want to make a more informed decision for their consumption, they can, and if they don't, they don't. I mean, this is just, I still have an iPhone. Like, I know it was made by slave labor and the worst circumstances imaginable, but I'm still using it. So like we each kind of like have to deal with that ethical tension in different ways. But I think it's good that we have the opportunity and the possibility to criticize these institutions. But yeah, like to your point, because it's like all magnified on a site like Twitter, where you just get the most pompous, just self-important people who are constantly like it becomes like you'd mentioned that like you guarantee most likely these people aren't working for like a charity or like an orphanage or something, like because if in real life the people that are working and doing real good in the world, they're usually doing real good in the world. They're not wasting hours of their day or their night just railing on random companies and complaining about things. And I think there's multiple levels to that, because I think on one hand, obviously, part of this speaks to just the disenfranchisement of so many people around the world, specifically Americans right now, where like there are so many people without health care, and the economy is terrible, and there's all these just competing factors of inequality which are making the circumstances rise for certain people, especially younger people, to kind of just be cynical and be critical, and then they find themselves in a situation where maybe they don't have a lot of opportunity, or they don't have their basic needs met. So when they go on Twitter, it's like a what do you call it? It's like cathartic to criticize things, and I think that level is fine. Like if it's someone who's not in a great life situation, like I'm not gonna come down on them for criticizing something, because I think that's it's all circumstantial. But to the point of the fact is that a lot of the people who do this and kind of spearhead this whole concept of just kind of criticizing brands and companies for the sake of brands and companies, a lot of those people are people who work in tech. They work in they're programmers, they're coders, they're people who are like already in these industries in a way. So you get this weird ethical tension where it's like I think it's great to criticize any institution of power, but we should also just be honest about our own lives and like the stuff that we consume, and come to some type of like nuanced understanding to be like, okay, I can criticize this company for this ethical behavior, but I also have to understand that I'm going to consume them, or I'm going to consume a product like them, and there's going to be some line of problematic reasoning along that like line of getting the product from the source into my hands. And it just sucks, because I feel like Twitter especially is not really a place for that type of behavior. It's just way easier to like upload that newer meme of the crab annihilating the other crab, saying "silence brand," and like I think that's hilarious, and I love it. But it just speaks to how much easier it is to be like, oh, here's an ad, I'm going to criticize the ad, versus like you have to actually think through, okay, why is this bad? Like, why do I feel this way about this? What are some of the other practices or other consumer behaviors I'm participating in that also are part of this whole larger problem as far as on a systemic level? And it really sucks that Twitter doesn't really have the infrastructure to allow the space for that to happen.
Yeah, and that's something where when people were first coming online and really enjoying it, there was like this uptick in people coming online and people enjoying it. And then as people got used to it, a lot more of it was reactionary, where they would be like, well, you didn't fully qualify everything you said in 140 or 280 characters. You know, right. you said this little snippy thing, or even, hey, I noticed that in creating this joke, you based the joke on a factual inaccuracy. Well, I'm here to to correct the inaccuracy.
Oh my God.
And
The rationals.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And so to me, it seems almost as if you were going to design a system. Now, I will say first, so I'm going to reel it back a little bit and say, I live in Columbus, Ohio. I live pretty close to downtown. I live in a little neighborhood that's kind of close to downtown. It's close to the campus. And the Midwest is like notorious. And Nathan, I know you live in Philly. I love Philly. It's an awesome city. And I think it has kind of, it has more of a big city vibe than Columbus. But, I've always really enjoyed Philly. I've enjoyed the people there. And I think the people in Columbus have a similar vibe where everybody is really just honestly warm and just honestly like very, very personable and very friendly, not on a superficial level, but like actually really nice people. And so I walk around and I'll go to the park, and people I see in my neighborhood, I'll say hi to them. I'll pet their dog. They'll pet my dog, whatever. If I've seen them multiple times and, I won't know anything about them, I'll stop and chat with them about the weather, whatever, because I live in the Midwest and the weather's always changing. And so generally from day to day, I have this very idyllic life. And so that's my frame of reference, really. And I think maybe other people don't necessarily have this frame of reference, but I feel like, online you can post and you'll get reactions from people, and more often than not, it's like they are reacting to engender a reaction back, because what they really want is they would really like to have a nice conversation, but I think they don't feel like they can just write to you, a person they don't know, whether you have, 100 followers online, whether you have 10 followers, whether you have 10,000 followers online. It's really hard online to just write to somebody and say, hey, what's up? I wanted to talk to you. That's like if somebody said that online. Now, I will say I am old and corny, and I like having conversations with people. I would talk to somebody if they said that, but I think most people don't want to be vulnerable enough to just literally say, hey, I like you. I think they're funny. I would like to spend some time talking to you. Nobody would say that. Instead, somebody would say something to you that's snarky to try to impress you. And I think that's where a lot of these brand interactions come from, is that it's not even that people necessarily hate the brand. It's that they want to affect this idea that they do in order to try to get a reaction. And it's like the more strong the viewpoint you take on and the harsher the attitude you affect, the more that you might be likely to think, hey, I'm going to get a strong reaction out of this, and I'm going to up my chances of having a back and forth.
And it's weird, too, because that has the reverse effect as well, so you're talking about the people who would be criticizing these brands and kind of going after them with these, absolutist critical statements. It works the other way as well, where people with similar motivations who go to brands to have these conversations, or just there's people for Steak-'em. There's people who literally on a day-to-day basis will come back to the tweets or the account and just tweet stuff like, how's your day? Or what's going on? Or can you send me a meme? And it's interesting because I think it's in a lot of cases it has less to do with the brand itself and more to the point that you're making, where a lot of these people are just craving connection in any sense, and they're not getting an actual just normal interaction online anymore, because there is this you kind of went on earlier about how everything on Twitter is just this essentially a magnified look at all the best and the worst parts. It's you get all these different people groups and these extreme corners of ideologies combating online, like whether it's Nazism or even like there's people on the left who like there's this like pseudo wokeness where it's like everybody has to kind of like out woke each other, and if you post something at a given cultural moment that doesn't exactly like reach the standard of current status quo wokeness, then you just get wrecked by everybody. And there's this like weird so there's this like weird thing where we're all playing this game where if you're just a normal person and you want to assert your normal thoughts online, you can't really do that in any sphere, because whatever sphere you exist in, it's almost never enough, because there's always going to be people that want to up the ante as far as like what is permissible in a given group. So like when you go to a brand and you're just like some lonely kid, or you're just some schmuck in the middle of nowhere who doesn't have any friends or is maybe disenfranchised in some way or whatever it might be, and you see this brand just like casually interacting with people, but suddenly that becomes more appealing than the normal like just like hate mobs or just kind of like downward spirals that you might normally jump into about politics or current events in some way, because it's almost like a release, and you know what I mean. So like that also speaks to, it's weird because then there's like two sides to that, because there's the cultural side, which is people feeling lonely or disenfranchised, wanting to get attention, but then there's also the side where like brands inevitably are exploiting those feelings, because even just by the state of being a brand, it's all advertising. So then anytime, like this is something I've had to really pull back with Steakum in the past couple months, because like as this trend continues to evolve with like humanization and full-on integration with advertising and internet culture, it just gets weirder and weirder as far as like what the role of a brand is. And then it's like I have to take a step back and think, okay, wait, I'd love to just like DM this person who just reached out, like saying they're having a bad day or whatever, and they just want Steakum to say whatever, like kind words. I'd love to do that, but then in doing that, I'm also like projecting an image of advertising and like reinforcing the like this whole idea of like this consumer producer relationship, which isn't really my intent, but it's inevitable. So like there's kind of these two sides to the coin where like as people get more disenfranchised and they either get mad at brands or they go to brands for attention, brands either way have the upper hand, because if it's good attention or bad attention, people are paying attention to them and they can easily just exploit it. And that part of it really does suck for whatever it's worth.
Yeah. Well, and you know, it does, but the thing that I always come back to is, you know, and like I said, my opening statement is, you know, I don't choose to experience advertising. I don't want to be advertised to. I feel like I can make the choices myself as to what I want to eat and what I want to experience. Mm-hmm. But, you know, I really think it's fine. Because I always feel, and maybe this is like self-loathing, but I feel like, look, if I can go online, I can fuck around. Like today I posted a picture. I photoshopped Elizabeth Holmes, who's the lady who did Theranos, mm-hmm. which is like that hoax company that tested people's blood, but it didn't really work. I took her and I took Mark Zuckerberg's face, and I swapped them onto each other. So it was like Mark Zuckerberg making this weird face onto this black turtleneck, and it was Elizabeth Holmes' weird face on Mark Zuckerberg's weird body, and he's waving and he's got his Mark Zuckerberg outfit on. You know, if I can do that, and then that is ultimately, it's ultimately tied to, you know, I post comics online, I post writing online, it's all funny. I sell T-shirts, I have a Patreon, I sell music, I sell mugs, I sell all this stuff, right? I have advertising on my website. And, you know, it's all run through a third party, but they're advertisers. And so everybody is doing this stuff. And if somebody is going to pretend they're going to live this lie that they are somehow going online and posting stuff all day long, all the time, and actively collecting this following of people. They're going to pretend that they're doing that for no reason. Of course, the reason is to get attention,
right,
and
absolutely.
to feel like you're powerful, and to feel like you wield influence. And you'll see there's absolutely nobody online who goes online who has 10 or 20 or 50,000 followers, which, by the way, is a lot of people. That's a lot of fucking people. That's like a small town in Ohio, right?
Absolutely.
And those small towns have Walmarts. Those are big fucking places, right? You know, if you're going to go online and do that, you are doing it for, if you're not selling things, if you're not taking your attention and diverting it into charitable causes, which, by the way, is awesome if you do, but basically nobody ever does that. If you're not taking it and you're not diverting it into your own product that you're selling somehow, then you're doing it for attention, or you're doing it so you can wield influence the next time you take an airplane flight and the airplane flight doesn't go the way you want to, and you want to say, hey, at Delta, why don't you not fuck up why don't you not ruin my airplane flight, right?
Yeah.
And everybody does that who has, 100, 1,000, 10,000 followers. They all do that. So it's all, everybody's playing this game where they pretend that they are just absolutely objective, and they pretend that they're just online just for some kind of noble reason, and it has nothing to do with making connections with other people, and it has nothing to do with ego. It has nothing to do with influence, and they pretend ultimately, of course, that it has nothing to do with money, when anybody who's a big prolific writer online, even if they affect this whole attitude of I'm the cool guy, I'm going to hold everybody's feet to the fire, I'm going to roast, the Arby's guy, or I'm going to roast, whoever, whichever brand, I'm going to roast the guy who does the social media for Birkenstocks. I'm going to say they're ass sandals that I put on my ass, right? And it's all self-directed ultimately.
Yeah.
Right. And, I understand that. And I know that everything that I do is ultimately self-directed. It's under my name. It funnels into me doing what I'm going to do. And there are people who have not come to that realization. And I think that's what ultimately causes people to act the way they do, and to act holier than thou, when at the end of the day, they're beeping out their little messages on their iPhone. And there was like a slave in China, and he tried to throw himself out of the Foxconn building, but he landed in the net. You've heard of this,
yes,
right?
Yeah, they had to put
You've
the
heard
nets
of
up.
the net.
Yep.
Yeah, Foxconn, of course, the contractor that makes iPhones in China, mostly in Shenzhen, China. And they have a big net outside the building, so you can't commit
Can't
suicide.
even kill yourself.
Because too many people tried to do it right.
So insane. Yeah. Well, you have an interesting perspective with all this, because you've been playing the game for so long. What you're trying to get at here, it's interesting because you have the experience of trying all these different projects, and you're fully aware that ultimately, as cool as it is, and as much as a fulfilling feeling it is to share something that other people enjoy and to put something good into the world, ultimately it's for you. I mean, ultimately it's the good feeling you get. It's what you love to do. Knowing that other people also love it makes you feel even better. So it's and it's also what drives you. With this podcast, I was just talking to someone doing an interview earlier today for it, and this guy was asking me why I do it or what was the inspiration. And I was just honestly, I just love talking to people, and if I didn't love talking to people about the topics I talked about, it would show. I mean, obviously the show would suck. Right. You know what I mean? I'm doing it because I enjoy it. No matter how much I want to put this, whatever you want to call it, this attitude that, like you said, it's all for other people and I'm just trying to share wisdom and start good conversations. Like, it might all be true, but at the same time, it's all for me. And I think a lot of these people that are in these situations that might be younger streamers or comedians or writers or journalists, whatever, they do have that attitude. Like, it's not a completely selfish thing. Like, they are in some way, shape, or form just doing this for the good of humanity or society. And then as soon as they land that cushiony gig or their personal brand explodes, in a lot of cases, the first thing they do is sell out. Like, the first thing they do is, it's like, oh, perfect. Now I can start shilling for whatever. Like, I can start my Patreon. I can start selling shit on Teespring. I can start funneling people into my personal brand. And, like, there's literally nothing wrong with that. But it's this whole contradictory attitude that so many of them have in the early phases of, like, I'm never going to be that person. I'm never going to sell out. Like, I'm somehow above this whole system, but, like, we exist in the system. We have to survive. We have to pay our bills. And I know it's just like, I remember, I forget what I said. It was a Steakum tweet at one point, and someone was, like, asking, like, how I live with myself or whatever, like, on the account. And I think I just said something like, yeah, like, it's a job. Like, unfortunately, like, a lot of people have to do, like, whatever types of jobs, and this is what pays the bills. And then someone quote tweeted that and was like, you know who else said that, Steakum? The Nazis. And I was like, oh my God. I mean, it's true to a certain degree, I guess. Like, like, of course, there are certain jobs that have more and less ethical tensions. Like, I would 100%, I'd hope you would concede too. Like, as much as you like to say that we're playing the same game, which we are, there's levels to it. I mean, for you, you're an artist, you're a creator, you're putting your work directly in front of your fans to then sell them products, but it's like, it's a direct relationship. Whereas what I'm doing is I'm working for a corporation, or at least it's a small, whatever they call it. It's a family-owned business, but it's still a fairly large brand, and they are, like, you know, creating a product to push it in front of people. And the object with my advertising, I mean, it's kind of, Steakum's a weird sort of outlier in this entire conversation, because I was able to do well by using irony. Like, I'm able to say stuff like, buy our frozen beef sheets, and then people think it's funny, and then it just works. So, like, I'm being honest about what it is, but at the same time, it's like tricking people into thinking, you know what I mean? It's like I'm using humor and satire and what. So it's like, that's a weird, the kind of outlier, but there's still that element of, like, I'm having to directly, in some way, shape, or form, misinform people, or just at least, you know, tout up the attributes of my product over the other person's or company's product and get them to sell it. And there's a little bit more of, like, a, I guess you'd say, just like a corporate, not a detachment, but just like a level to it. And there's more power dynamics, there's more money involved. It's just a different system. So I think, like, the higher you go, like, you go from, like, a guy like you who's a creator, and then you kind of move up to small businesses, and then you move up to regional businesses, like Steakum's kind of regional, and then you move up to, like, national, international, and the higher you go on that ladder to the multi-billion-dollar corporations, the more fuckery is involved. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, and you've got, of course, there are aspects to that where obviously, if you work in a larger and larger company, you basically got people up the ladder from you who are making the decisions.
Right.
And again, there's, like, power and influence and stuff that goes into it. But I'll tell you something. When I was on the Atkins diet, and this was 2004, something like that. This was before Atkins died. The guy who invented the Atkins diet, and this is the progenitor, of course. If you weren't dieting 15 years ago, if you weren't already, like, fat or concerned about your weight or concerned about your health 15 years ago, in, like, 2004, you may not have known. But Atkins diet, it was basically the progenitor of keto, right? So it's like what everybody calls it keto now, which is just eating protein and fat, no carbs, whatever. And so I was eating a lot of Steakums then, and they were fine. And I had a buddy come down, and like you said, it's a very regional thing. And I had a buddy come down. He lived up in Toronto, and they don't have, or they didn't, last time I saw him, they didn't have steakums in Toronto. And he came down through America, and of course, you know, a lot of it was very entertaining because it's like different culture, everything else.
Yeah.
And by the way, he really marveled at how clean Columbus was. Columbus is kind of like a mall. So I was very taken by the fact that he said, you know, I didn't expect the city to be so beautiful. I didn't expect the people to be so friendly. And of course, everybody's idea they've conjured of Canadians is that they're very friendly and very polite and everything. And so, of course, I was very taken by this. I was very pleased to hear this. But one of the things he pointed out was steakums. He said, you know, and he's a big meat eater, keto guy, whatever, and basically said, you know, they don't have these where I'm from, and he threw them on, and he cooked them up, and he ate them, and he liked them. And you know what? At the end of the day, there's people that are going to criticize steakums. They're going to criticize Wendy's. They're going to criticize Arby's. They're going to criticize McRib. And these are people who are they're eating the same food as you and I.
Right.
These people breathe the same oxygen. They drink the same tap water we do. You know, they probably go to the gas station and they get the shitty flavor of Powerade, right? To drink along with the same food that we eat, right? And really everybody is doing the same thing. And it's just the burden should be laid at the feet of those who think they're better than us. You know, I'm reminded of a man many have talked about. I believe his name was Jesus Christ.
I knew something was coming. I knew it. Let's wait.
You know.
Oh my God, dude.
I know. Listen, I know you probably got to go soon. I know you probably want to wrap this up.
I'm fine.
But I want to tell you something. A few years ago, look, I hate landlords. If I ever had the money to buy property and make money off property, I probably wouldn't, because I think it's a really bad job, because landlords I've ever had have always hated their jobs.
Yeah.
But I had about a decade ago, I had a landlord, and our toilet didn't work. And this landlord would always hire like the worst, cheapest handyman he could find. And so we had, you know, our toilet was leaking. Toilets have this circle that's like made of wax or something. So I've never fixed the bottom of a toilet. I've reached in the bowl and I've reached in the tank and I've fixed all the stuff in there. I've never gone underneath.
Yeah.
But there's apparently the seal. Anyway, the seal was messed up. The seal was leaking. And the landlord sends this handyman over to fix it, and he does a very bad job, and he leaves, and it's still leaking. And I call the landlord again. The handyman comes back, and he's like pretty disgruntled this time, and he like goes in. He's like very demonstratively like banging stuff around, and he leaves again. And then you know, a day or two later, it's leaking again. So I call the landlord, and the same damn handyman comes back, and he's like super mad at me. And I'm like, I have to shit in this thing. Yeah. Right. This is the best, like, I could theoretically shit other places.
Yeah.
I could theoretically take a pee other places, but it's not as good. Like, this is the best place I can do it. I have to have this in my house because if I wake up, right, I can't shit on the floor or whatever.
Yeah.
And finally he fixes it. He's like banging stuff around. He's cursing and stuff, and he leaves. And he turns as he's looking out the door. He turns and he looks at me and he says, you know, there's only one perfect man in the world. And his name was Jesus Christ. And he walks out the door.
wait, unironically?
Yeah. No, he was a guy. Do you know the guy? If you've seen Bob's Burgers, like Teddy, but like not like an uncharismatic version, like an evil version of that guy.
Oh my God. Dude.
No,
Oh, go ahead.
I think that everybody views themselves as, the good man being hung on the cross and suffering the sins that everybody in the world has ever committed.
Right.
And, everybody's fucking around. Everybody's trying to get attention, whether they send an app message to American Airlines or they don't like what a burger company says. And they're like, oh, yeah, burgers? Why don't you shut up, burgers? Everybody is like, I'm up there on the cross doing this for the people.
Yeah. Yeah, I have to, before I respond to that, I have to just put this little side note in here because you mentioned the whole bit about the Atkins diet. Fun fact, that was actually with my dad's agency, which he started in like the early 90s on his own. That was his first big breakthrough client. And he actually, that was I'm pretty sure he helped like their initial branding grow to like an international company in the very early stages, like in the late 90s, I want to say.
Oh.
It's just so funny that you mentioned that. This whole podcast is now becoming like an ad for all these brands, and
no,
I had to put that in.
I've been getting suckered by you guys for my whole fucking life.
Dude, you didn't even know it. Meanwhile, like my family lineage is just like getting you for all you're worth from every angle. But I want to. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, you're balling. You're balling. Yeah.
Man, but before I don't want to jump off that because you said a lot of good shit in there, and I do think it's something should be said. Like all what you said there, I agree with, but I still do think there's something to be said about just like the idea of calling out hypocrisy for what it is, because like you said, we're all hypocrites to a degree. So I mean, you can use whataboutisms and you can kind of shift the goalposts and use the argument of calling someone a hypocrite in almost any reference, because like you said, we all are in different contexts. So I think there is a certain degree where like it's good to remind people that need to be reminded, who are on that like holier than thou ground, like, hey, you're still down here with the rest of us. Like there's definitely something to be said about that. But I still also do think that there are levels. Like it's not enough to say, and I think you would agree with this, like it's not enough to just say, hey, this is hypocritical of you. Like you have to also assert in some way, like what is the problem, like what are some solutions, because like there's certain contexts where people would just say like, oh, you like it's like the classic it's like socialist argument where people like Republicans will get mad and be like, oh, like you're a socialist, well you have an iPhone, boom, hypocrite, roasted, it's done. And then you're like, no, like that doesn't make sense. Like, and you can say it's a hypocrisy. Like you can say, yeah, I mean, there are like these different hypocrisies we can all point out in each other, but you have to also be able to back it up to the degree, of the problem itself, because some hypocrisies are much more glaring than other ones. Like some are much more universal than other ones. So it's like, I just think it's important for people, for anyone who's listening to this, it's like, from a personal standpoint, I want to encourage people to be more critical, as long as it's in the framework of having like a broader understanding of how the world works. Because like I think, again, like through online just interactions, it's just easy. It's so easy because the threshold is so low for people just to call out hypocrisy or to just call out things that they don't like, and then that's it. Like that's the minimal requirement, because that's what we reward. Like we reward the people who just make these absolutist, ridiculous statements because maybe it makes us feel good or maybe it makes us mad, and either way it's going to give them attention. And I just think more people should definitely be critical and call out hypocrisy where it's needed, but also just understand that there's levels to it, and that it just saying something is bad doesn't make you any better. You know what I mean? Like there's definitely like there's a level here for how like the societal standard we should be propping up for critical thinking and understanding, like without trying to be uber rational, because I don't want it to be like we all need to be critical thinkers about literally everything, because I think that's also ridiculous. But there's, you know, a certain degree where we should at least understand what we're angry about and understand why, you know, that fits into our specific cultural context. And like you kind of been hitting at this whole time, there's a difference between criticizing a brand or criticizing a company or the actions of a person and criticizing the people behind the brands, or just like the people in these situations that maybe aren't ideal. Like you worked for that chemical company, and obviously that wasn't an ideal circumstance, but to a certain point, I mean, you're there to pay the bills. Like you're there to get by like everyone else. So like to a certain point, what do we do? You know, like we just have to kind of understand that there's levels to all this. And I don't know. I just wish more people took the time to think about it.
Well, yeah, and I think that it's very easy to think in absolute terms, to think starting out with the framework of, okay, I am bad, or starting out with a framework of I'm good, and everybody that is making money is bad, is like a very hard thing to do, because the only way you would have that viewpoint and it would be rational from your own point of view is if you come from money. And if you have like a stash of money, you have a free place to live and a free car to drive and an internet connection that's paid for, and you have everything already given to you, then it's very easy for you to, in your own mind, rationally criticize people who are, you know, trying to exploit social media, or people who are trying to exploit the economic system. I'm not talking about exploiting individual people. I'm talking about anybody that goes and takes a job. They feel like they're being disproportionately paid for what they're doing. Otherwise, they don't feel like they're getting a good deal, right? And I'm not saying that everybody who is going and being employed is necessarily engaging in a consensual transaction, because in a capitalist society, everybody has to make money to survive unless somebody is giving them money for free. So, of course, you know, if you go around and you are criticizing, you say, okay, so Facebook is evil, right? Very easy statement to make. Facebook is evil, right? Mm-hmm. And so the average salary of somebody at Facebook is $240,000. Now, I don't know about you. That's more than I make. So I have a daughter. My daughter is 10. And so $240,000, I could pay my house off in less than a year. I could pay my car off in less than a year. Give it a couple more years when she's 12. And all of a sudden, I have this immense stash of money, and she can get a really good education. Right. She's an artist. She likes art, and she is into games, and she likes creating art, and she likes looking at art, and she likes reading, and she likes writing. So she likes all of these things, and so it would be very easy for me to say, okay, I have $30,000 or $40,000 a year. You can go to this college that will enable you to fulfill your educational needs as it relates to what you like to do, and you can get this comprehensive art education, which right now I can't pay for. Yeah. Right? If she wants to go and get an art education, she can go to community college, and I could probably pay for that, and then go to regular 4-year college, and I could probably pay for some of that, and she could get some loans, which of course have their own problems. You know, if you go bankrupt, your student loans aren't forgiven. You know, it's this whole thing. So that's really the only, like, my family and my friends, but especially my wife and daughter, are important to me. And so it's like you're saying, okay, I need you to make me happy, a random guy online. I need you to forego paying off your house, paying off your car, and giving your child an education in something that will be truly fulfilling to her. I need you to give that up or otherwise I won't think you're cool.
Right. Right.
And so it's really easy, right? And of course, I have very, like you brought up socialism. Yeah, I think everybody should have health care. Mm-hmm. I think with the way the employment market is going, I know that there's another recession on the way. I know that many jobs, such as retail jobs and transportation jobs, such as taxis and truck drivers, are going to be automated within the next 10 years. That's just a matter of companies making more money, which they have to do organizationally, right? That just is what it is. That's going to happen. And so we need a basic income so people can pay for their food and their health care and all this, and their rent and all this stupid shit that everybody has to pay for.
Yeah.
That doesn't preclude me from selling mugs that have jokes on them, right, so I can pay my rent, right? So I can pay for my car that I need to take the mugs to the post office. And there's a whole group of people out there, and people have tried to do this to me before, and it's I hate to be the guy that's like, I'm not mad. Actually, I'm laughing.
Yeah.
But it is truly not hurtful to me when somebody, I had somebody do this a while ago. They took, I was interviewed about my blog. I have a blog called The Worst Things for Sale.
Oh, yeah.
And the idea is that, everybody has to spend money on stuff all the time, but you don't need to spend money on crap that is not going to help your life, mm-hmm, right? And so, by pointing out products that are not good and not don't accomplish any task, don't make you feel good or whatever, it's an entertainment product, and plus the products are funny to laugh at. I like finding them. I like writing about them, whatever. I had somebody drag out and take a screenshot of my interview of me saying, I'm writing about stuff that people don't need to have. And then they took a screenshot of my store where I'm like selling this mug, and the mug is like $12. And they're like, yeah, do you need this coffee mug? And it's like, well, they're like,
gotcha,
boom,
bro. Yeah.
I gotcha. Yeah. You say exactly what you said. You say you're a socialist, and yet you have an iPhone.
Yep. Yep. So obnoxious, dude. And like you said, like you pointed out, like healthcare, like just the idea of like Medicare for all or something like it. Just this is like a very one of the more basic populist principles that the majority of Americans obviously want and need. Like there's something like 30 million people that don't have it, and millions more that have shitty healthcare. And like there's issues like that when you point toward like different socioeconomic systems like socialism, or I should say democratic socialism, or like social democrats or democratic socialists, whatever. Like I know there's kind of interlocking ideas there, and people use the terminology all wrong, so it's hard to even know really what's what in the political spectrum. But even just having those conversations, it's so hard with people on Twitter, especially. I mean, online in general, but Twitter, it's like everything is so hyper magnified. Like I talk to my friends in real life who are educated and they're up to date with what's going on in the political spectrum, but when I use certain terms and language, like the kind of stuff we're talking about here, it just goes over so many of their heads because they're not on Twitter every day. Like there's so much shit where like even just how we communicate these ideas, like so say Bernie Sanders and AOC claim that they're democratic socialists, but then you have a bunch of people who are extremely online who are like, well, actually, their policy positions fit more into what social democrats are saying. And then it becomes this like nitpicking thing where like language is being obscured and people are kind of confused on the terminology, and we're bantering back and forth about definitions and which system is better. And it becomes this like, not like a, I don't want to say it's like a what do you call it? Like an absolutist thing where like it's not like in every circumstance online there's people who would like you have to like a purist, I should say, like you have to believe this. Like it's not like that everywhere, but especially in the political sphere it gets more and more like that. And then when you step outside of it, it's like normal day-to-day people just aren't paying as close attention to this. Like if you just poll normal people on a lot of these policy propositions or issues, like you can get or like roughly where they stand with them, but when it comes to like your extremely online interpretations of a given system and then how you fit into said system, it's like the people on Twitter, you could just sidestep and say one thing that is slightly off base of what, you know, the general populace of a certain group believes, and then all of a sudden you're painted as like the worst person ever. Like, meanwhile, you're just the difference between like a democratic socialist and a social democrat. Or like, whereas in real life, there is like no difference to that. But like on Twitter, it's a huge difference. It's like the difference between pure like leftists and then the difference between kind of neoliberal left-leaning people. And then it's like that gap is so wide on when you're online, but in real life, it's like people just kind of like look at you sideways. Like, what are you talking about? Like, these are virtually the same thing. Like, that's just the far side of the left-wing party. And it's like, I don't know. It's just so easy to get caught in all these people's opinions, because then you're just, like you said, you're working on Twitter, you're doing interviews and you're posting them on Twitter or whatever. So like you're getting this instant feedback, and then people are feeding it right back to you, usually out of context, usually looking for things to nitpick, and then it just makes everything just more of a hellhole. And there just seems to be no way around it. Like, as cliche and stupid as it's become to say this, I mean, it really is like our monkey, just tribal brains, or we're just so apt to these natural behaviors from behind a screen. Whereas like you and I are talking not face to face, but we have a little bit more context here, and it's just a lot easier to communicate this way. Whereas through a screen, there's just so many more things you can say that can piss somebody off or trigger them in a way that never would if you were face to face. And it just makes, I don't know, it just makes all these issues so much more complex for literally no reason. Like, there's no reason someone in your shoes should be getting shitted on by people for selling products for your art. Like, it's just so, it's ridiculous, but that's just where we are. Like, I don't know.
Right.
It's like you're a band, you know what I mean? Like, you're like no one's shitting on bands that are touring, playing music, and then they're selling merch. It's like no one is doing that. Like, they could be a anarchist punk band and they're still selling t-shirts and CDs. Like, it is what it is. I don't know how else to say it, you know? It's so frustrating.
No, and I like that you pointed out all the little mini categorizations of all the leftist stuff. And look, what it comes down to is, realistically, I mean, I live in a swing state, and you live in in Pennsylvania.
Both swing states, yeah.
So Ohio is a super swing state, right? And so ultimately what happens is everybody just chatters back and forth. And I've muted a lot of these terms. I don't have anything to input, and I certainly don't want to read about it. You know, when it comes down to it, I'm going to go vote, and, you know, I'm going to pick, you know, almost certainly going to pick the Democrat. I live in a swing state. Yeah, those are unfortunately the only viable choices. Look, in 2016, a lot of people in Ohio, in a swing state, they went to the poll and they were like, well, Hillary Clinton is terrible. Which, yeah, she is. Hillary is terrible. Bill Clinton is terrible. Donald Trump is terrible. Yeah. You know, lots of people are pretty fucking terrible when you get anybody who has the ego where they're going to get into these positions and they're going to wheedle their way up to the top of a political party, and they've got all this dirty money and they've got X, Y, and Z. But if you've got a binary choice, your reaction might be to not vote, to vote for some random person, to vote for a third party or whatever. And there's really, you have to rationally vote. I mean, in 2004, I pulled the lever for John Kerry. I didn't think John Kerry was awesome. I thought he was like a weird, extremely boring guy. But the alternative was George Bush.
Yeah.
Right? Or I could have voted for like Lyndon LaRouche. May he rest in peace, right? Major weirdo crankster. I could have voted, who the hell knows? I probably at some point could have voted for Ron Paul. Don't want to. He's basically a libertarian Klansman. Not my thing, right? Yeah. So at the end of the day, everybody's going to litigate this, and everybody's going to talk about this and fight with each other for years and years. And then, we had the midterm elections in 2018. We're going to have the presidential election and the local election, and the representatives are going to get reelected because they have a 2-year terms in 2020, and all this stuff is going to happen, and people are going to just have to punch the Chad or pull the lever or beep the screen for whoever the Democrat is. And it doesn't, ultimately it doesn't fucking matter. And I think that's what a lot of people are doing all this for, is they are acting completely insanely, and they're being very inconsiderate of their fellow men and women and non-binary friends, mm-hmm. right? They're being inconsiderate of everybody who follows them, everybody who doesn't follow them, because ultimately they feel powerless. And I think that is what all of this comes down to, is that everybody's subjected to this stuff day in and day out, and no one person can stop it, right? Yeah. And, some people have this sense of powerlessness, and they go and they shoot up schools. Like, that's not awesome to think about, but it, especially if you have a kid in school, but it happens. Mm-hmm. Some people, if they feel powerless, they go and they say, well, Trump is bad, and he's dumb, and he's fat. And some people say, well, I noticed that you said something about Bernie, and he's a social democrat, not a democratic socialist, or he's right. He's XYZ instead of ZYX or whatever. And everybody feels powerless because the entire world is proceeding as this emergent phenomena that is beyond any of our controls. And I think it's very easy to take that powerlessness and take it out and to sublimate. The word is sublimate, which is where you take a feeling you have and you push it onto something or someone who is not necessarily affiliated with it, but it's a way of you exercising your power on somebody who you feel you have power over.
I'm going to use that word now.
Yeah, you're sublimating your desire to have power in the political world by yelling at somebody who used the wrong socialist term to describe Bernie or AOC or Pete Buttigieg. I don't know that guy's name. He seems cool. He's smart. Yeah. Right? Or Andrew Yang. God, we have such a crew. Joe Biden, may he rest in peace. God, just such a motley crew, and nobody, and it strikes me that nobody can really come together. Everybody is still fighting. Yeah. Everybody agrees on this stuff. Everybody agrees that, like, poor people should have houses and food. Everybody agrees that everybody should have Medicare. Ultimately, everybody's yelling at each other because of all these reasons, and nobody is quite willing to accept that it's totally, absolutely ridiculous. And I think that is something that maybe folks need to take into consideration, is that none of this is real. Yeah. Right. I mean, it's real. It has real consequences, but like all of this is just the emergent phenomena of like particle interactions. So I have trouble taking it. I have trouble taking it seriously. Look, I'll go to the voting booth. I live in a swing state. I'm going to vote in 2020. Whoever runs against Trump or Mike Pence or whatever, best of luck. Yeah, I'll vote for you. Right. But in the meantime, miss me with that argument, Chief, and I do not want to sip the tea.
Yeah, I mean, and you speak a lot of truth in there, just about, again, going back to this idea that, yeah, in a lot of the circumstances, the people on all sides of the spectrum, like, people just feel like they have no power, they have no voice, they have no say. So it enacts this attitude where we have to push these feelings outward in some of the worst ways. And I think in a lot of ways it's been good. Like, I think the more people I talk to about this, it seems like the general consensus from the smartest people, at least, like people way smarter than me, are just saying that it seems like we're in this just in between weird infancy stage of like rapid technological advancement and the internet and all this, and it's really just so much of it is going to evolve over the next probably 10 or 15 years, and I should say devolve. Like, it's probably going to get worse before it gets better. But we're just in this, like we're just trapped, and like you said, like there's kind of that propensity to have like a nihilist outlook, or at least a relativist outlook, to be like, well, it is what it is. Like, this just, there's nothing we can do, or it's out of our control to a degree. And I think, people are kind of wrestling back and forth with these attitudes. It's like, on one hand, people want to believe that everything has a purpose, and they want to believe that they can tell a better story and that they can hope for a better life. And then on the other hand, people look across the world and they see all this chaos and they see everything through this magnifying glass online, and it's just like, it's very damning and it's very daunting, and it just puts this like wet, dark blanket over you, and it really makes it hard. Like, if you're spending all this time online, it really makes it hard to see the hope, and then that obviously just perpetuates these negative attitudes, and it all just kind of cycles into itself, and it does suck, because I think there is importance to nuance, and to, like, for whatever it's worth, like, language matters. Like, it does matter that we understand, like, the political spectrum and the terminology that people use to define themselves, and like, these are all, like, it's good to know the difference between a social democrat and a democratic socialist, for whatever it's worth. It's good to know, but when it becomes this thing where you use that as a wedge to just all of a sudden, like, put in between you and your friend, or you and someone on your timeline who just has the most subtle difference in understanding of these terms, it just becomes so self-defeating. And like, I think, like, even like you mentioned Andrew Yang, I feel like he's like the quintessential example of this, because he's someone who, I think, I've listened to a few interviews with him. I mean, he's like one of these newer kind of like polarizing figures, because he's lassoed in so much attention from the alt-right and like the libertarian right, because he's a neoliberal. Like, he still believes in capitalist ideals and all of that. But when you look at his actual policies, like, the propositions he's making are actually pretty similar to Bernie. So it's like, he still wants Medicare for all. He still wants all this stuff, but like, it's just through a completely different systemic lens. And like, that systemic lens then becomes the wedge that people put in between themselves to be like, well, if you support that, or if you even think that that's a good idea, you're no true leftist or whatever. And then it's like, come on. Like, I don't see it this phase of the election, or any election really, like, when you're this early, like, we're all still feeling this out, and it's all being put into the ether, and it's good to have these arguments, and it's good to have the discussions, but ultimately I think people just need to just like lay off the gas a little bit and be a little bit more patient, especially with the people that they're allies with. I was just talking with I don't know if you know Dan Sheehan. He runs the Not a Wolf Twitter account. It's like a he's great. He's a really funny guy, really smart guy, and we were just talking about this a little bit, and how, like, insofar as how, like, the left just has that tendency, much more so than the right at this point in history at least, to self-criticize, which is a good thing to a degree, but then it just becomes this infighting online where it's like everyone is just attacking everyone for these super subtle, nuanced differences. And when it comes to actual policy, getting back to your entire point there, it's like, you still just have to vote. Like, you're gonna vote for whoever's on the ballot. Like, all this stuff is good and it's fun. Like, if you're into politics, if you're into whatever, it's fun to get into the weeds with it, but you shouldn't let it affect your relationships to a certain point, and you also shouldn't let it, make you go a little crazy thinking so deeply about these really just like nuanced differences between subgroups within the party that you could really just parse out forever. I mean, you could parse out dozens of them just within like communism or socialism, and it's just not. To a certain point, it just becomes self-defeating, and I wish more people online thought about that. But again, it's the void. Like, there's no point in someone like me, again, because it's like you said, depending on your context or my context, I'm sitting here from this like holier than thou position, then being like, these dumb damn kids, they shouldn't be angry and talking about nuance. Like, just get along. And then everyone's like, well, easy for you to say. You're just this like privileged white dude who's sitting on like a cool job or whatever. It's like living a comfortable life. And then I'm like, well, yeah, like I don't know, like it's just it is what it is. Like I didn't choose where I was born. I didn't choose really any of this. I'm just doing what I got to do like the next guy, and here we are in this perpetual online chaos. I don't know. It is what it is.
Yeah, and I think something that's occurred to me and something that's really been a big influence in my life in the past few years is, I've always thought of myself as a nihilist. Mm-hmm. Like not in the sense of like, destroy things, make people feel bad. But I've always thought of myself as a nihilist in as much as, I don't think anything is real, mm-hmm. which is like probably like a little far out, but nothing is real. And, consciousness is just like a side effect of particle interactions and all this. And right. I don't believe in free will. This is like going way too far.
No, it's not. I get into this all the time on here. Totally. I'm with you.
but so really the only thing we have is how you deal with other people and how you deal with the world. And one of the things that I have felt really personally fulfilled by, that has really affected my worldview and really made me feel good, is I am, politically speaking, I'm pretty much a socialist. I think people should have their medical care taken care of. I think people should have income. I think people should not get paid minimum wage. Mm-hmm. I think the minimum wage should be a lot higher. X, Y, and Z, all these things. And one of the things I've really liked in the past few years is, I don't have a ton of money, but when I see somebody in my circle that's doing like GoFundMe, which, by the way, has become de facto a way for people to get medical care. GoFundMe has taken in over $1 billion. And curiously enough, actually, this is super sinister. The people that own GoFundMe have given money to a lobby to fight universal health care. But that's that's to be expected, right? So they make money off GoFundMe. They want to fight universal health care because they're making lots of money for themselves. But I will still, because it benefits people. A while ago, I had a buddy, don't know him super well, know him on Twitter, thought he's a funny guy. He got in a car wreck. He had epilepsy, had all these medical problems. He's in all this medical debt. His car got fucked up. So, I donated a little bit of money to him, shouted him out on my podcast. I do a podcast with my buddy Ed called, it's called Fuck the Future, yes. But we have to say FTF because of Apple or whatever. But, no, shouted him out on there, and he did pretty well, and he got a new car, he got his car fixed or something. It was really fulfilling. And then at the end of last year, I used, I manage, like on the low, I manage a few different social media accounts, and I wouldn't call them brands. I would call them creative projects. Yeah. And I manage a few of them. And one of them, we drove in about $7,000 to a combination of the National Alliance to End Homelessness, Planned Parenthood, the Ohio Domestic Violence Network, just a few, like Equitas Health, which does LGBT and AIDS awareness and healthcare, drove in like $7,000, which is a huge amount of money to me. I know it's a drop in the bucket, but it's a huge amount of money to me, and it was like really great. It made me feel good, and it really, finally reflecting on it. I'm going to turn 40 this year, which is really fucking old, and I'm reflecting on it. And some people come to this conclusion a lot earlier than me. Some people maybe never come to this conclusion, but there are things that are personally fulfilling to you, making the art you want to make, having family and friends that you love and who support you and who you can fulfill yourself through taking care of them in emotional or monetary ways or whatever. But really doing positive social things really is like fulfilling a need I had in my life. And I think that there's maybe a lack of awareness where people are trying to fill this whole, there's people who are educated or they are autodidacts where they have educated themselves on left-wing causes or they've educated themselves on socialism or left-wing political causes and ideas or communism or whatever. And all of this is based on the idea of having compassion for your fellow man. And I think a lot of the time in this sphere, like you mentioned, this compassion for your fellow man and understanding for the people around you, the people in your bubble, is severely lacking. And I think if people maybe had a little bit of restraint, had a little bit of like positive feedback towards people that they share political goals with, towards people that they share social goals with. And, I got very lucky last year. I had a little bit of extra money. I personally put like $500 into donating to charity and try to egg people on to do this. Yeah. And again, I know that's a total drop in the bucket. It's a huge amount of money to me. But I think if there could be some kind of awareness that doing this kind of thing, that working to help people and really, whether it's food bank, whether it's working for the homeless, whether it's working for women or minorities or LGBT, doing things for people that do not have the same privileges as you, it's really something that, if nothing else, if you can't look at it from the viewpoint of this is good for the world, this is good for other people, you can look at it from this is like a hack. Yeah. If you want to be a total tech bro about it, this is a hack for me to feel good about myself. And it works. I feel great.
Yeah.
Whenever I think about it, I feel great. I hacked my own brain. Listen to this. This is a total tech bro approach. I hacked my own brain to feel good by being nice to people.
Right. And it's like the whole argument of like intentions, right? Because obviously circumstantially intentions matter in many cases, but a lot of people argue in certain circumstances that intentions only matter to the degree that, the outcome occurs. Like, it doesn't really matter if you wanted to kill somebody drunk driving, you still kill them, and it's still a problem, etc. But like with this too, it's like you could be a really selfish person and just be doing this for yourself, but you're still putting a net good into the world. So like it doesn't really, to a certain extent, obviously not everybody even has the temperament to be doing something so empathetic, like my wife is so like literally the most empathetic person I've ever met. Like, she cries at literally everything, whereas I'm more on the other side of the spectrum. Like, I'm not empathetic, but I'm also I compartmentalize a lot more. So like for me, I think a lot more like the tech bro. Like, I think more logically. I'm like, okay, what could I be doing right now to help people? Like, whereas some people are much more like on the floor, like feet on the ground. They're hugging people. They're sharing stories, and like I do that as well. But my brain thinks about it in a much more like pragmatic way. So you kind of have to like meet people where they are to a certain extent, and just realize that like ultimately intentions, they matter in certain cases of doing harm. But in terms of doing good, your motivation matters a little less as long as you're putting a net good into the world.
Yeah, and I think that's maybe good. I like to find, because I will tend to, it's really easy and it's really entertaining to dig into like the bad side of technology and the bad side of society. I think that's a good point to end on. Yeah. Really, it's just that you can really, the way to fight back against this dopamine monster of Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, the way to get your own happiness back out of this is very simple, and nobody really talks about it. It is to do stuff that is good, and if you can't get off, if you really can't get anything out of doing something nice for somebody else, then I'm being totally serious, because I know a lot of people, especially young people, have problems with empathy. So listen, some people have irony poisoning. I have empathy poisoning. Okay. Mm-hmm. So you go and you give $20 on somebody's GoFundMe. You support somebody says something, somebody's having trouble, and you message them and you talk to them and you have a conversation, not because you're horny, but you have a conversation with them because you want to support them, right? Yes. If you have a lot of reach or you have a lot of influence, exploit it to give money to poor people. Make people feel guilty to give money to poor people.
Yes.
You can feel empowered, I just tricked 10 or 20 or 100 people into giving money to the food bank. And you're going to be, if you've never done it before, you're going to be surprised at how awesome it is. And that's my main way, apart from just creating stuff that's funny and doesn't hurt people, which is something I also like. But if you're not creative, just doing something like that to be good to other people, it doesn't matter how ironic you are or how poisoned you are or how deep in socialist Democrat versus Democrat socialist you are. It really will make you feel good. It's going to give you dopamine. I promise you. If it doesn't, tell me and I'll give you your $20 GoFundMe back.
Right. Please be directed to Drew's Twitter account and
right. I will PayPal you back for your money you wasted trying to feel good from helping somebody.
That's a great place to end, man. I appreciate that sentiment. I mean, it's true. It's just, it doesn't, in today's climate, it doesn't have the same, you don't get this, in a lot of cases, like you're saying, you do get a dopamine rush from helping people, but on social media, it's much more readily available to get the dopamine rush from hurting people and being critical. And, for as much good as that's done in a lot of areas that needed criticism and needed to kind of be deconstructed in our cultures, it's also just really messed up our individual relationships. And I think, it's good to be reminded that people need help. I mean, people just we all need it. I mean, everybody has that need for empathy from others. You have to give it to get it, and it's just it's an ebb and a flow. And I wish more people partook in that, and I wish there were more easily accessible ways to campaign and to get people excited about it on social media, because it's just hard. I forget who else. I was listening to someone recently where they said there's some study right now out. I don't know how old it is, but it basically demonstrated that when people are shown a picture or a video of a child in Africa or something in a commercial, and it's donate to this kid, give him 10 cents a month or whatever, the reaction from people seeing that and hearing that is at a certain magnitude. But then every time you add another person to that video, your empathy goes down, your reaction goes down, because for whatever reason, I think they were saying that it has to do with just our ability to exude empathy, and that the more people are involved, it becomes this thing where it's it's unattainable. Then it feels impossible to help. The bigger the problem gets, when you see stats that are X million amount of people are living in poverty right now, that doesn't make you want to give to charity, because it just makes you feel overwhelmed. But when it's a one-on-one situation, you actually feel like you're making a difference, you're much more prone to actually give the money and to make the effort to help people. So it definitely, I think, I mean, obviously you need both. You need mass charities, you need individual situations, but in what we're talking about, I definitely hope and wish people, would spend more time on that individual basis, just giving back, So it's really, it's good word, dude. Good. We just went to church a little bit. That was good.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, and thanks again. It was awesome talking to you, Nathan, and thanks again for inviting me on.
Yeah, man. Thanks so much again for the time. This might be my longest one. This is great. And and tell Ed that I still care about him, even though he hates Steakham's Twitter. Just tell him that. All right.
I defended you.
Oh my God.
I defended you.
Dude, I think it's so funny when I see him posting about it. I'm just like, you know what? Like I said earlier, it's like I think it's good when people criticize brands to a point. It's just really funny. I knew when I was talking to you, I'm like, I love that they do a podcast, and I'm like listening to them do a podcast together, and now I'm talking to you, so I had to sneak it in, but
we do. We're critical about brands, and we're my podcast, Fuck the Future, very critical about the dystopia the world has become.
I love it, man.
But for the record, I did defend you. I said you're a cool guy.
Oh man, I don't need defending. It's fine. You're too good. You're being too kind. I appreciate it though, man. And I'll include in the show notes all the links to all the stuff you got going on. Was there anything you wanted to sign off with, like any specific place you want to send people, like your Patreon or your Twitter or whatever?
I'm on Twitter as Drew Toothpaste. It's spelled just how it sounds. Go on there and check me out. And if you like me, feel free to follow me. And that's pretty much it. Everything I do is like linked from there. So
all right,
check it out. And thanks again for having me on, Nathan.
Yeah, it was a great time, man. All right, well, I'll catch you back on Twitter.